Book 4. I am traversing the remote places of the Pierides, untrodden by the soul of anyone before. It is a joy to approach pure springs, and to drink from them, and it is a joy to pick new flowers, and to seek a preeminent crown for my head from that place whence the Muses had wreathed the temples of no one before. First, because I am teaching about great things and proceeding to free the mind from the narrow bonds of religion. Next, because I am writing so clear a poem about so obscure a subject, touching everything with the charm of the Muses. For this too seems to be not without reason. For just as when physicians try to give loathsome wormwood to children, they first touch the rim of the cup all around with the sweet, golden liquid of honey, so that the unsuspecting age of children may be tricked as far as their lips, and so that meanwhile the child might drink down the bitter wormwood juice, and though deceived, be not deceased, but rather by such means be restored and become well. So I now, since this system seems for the most part to be too bitter to those who have not tried it, and the common people shrink back from it, wanted to explain our system to you in sweet-spoken Pierian song, and touch it, so to speak, with the sweet honey of the Muses. I have done so in the hope I might in this way be able to hold your attention in our verses until you perceive the whole nature of things, and are fully aware of its usefulness. And since I have shown what the nature of the mind is, and from what things it thrives when joined with the body, and in what way, when separated, it returns to its first beginnings, now I will begin to treat for you what closely relates to these things, that there exist what we call images of things, which, like films ripped from the outer surface of things, fly back and forth through the air. These are the same things which strike our minds with terror when they come to us awake, and in sleep when often we behold wondrous shapes and images of those who have left the light, and which often wake us with a start when we are adrift in sleep, lest by chance we think that souls make their escape from Acheron, or that shades fly about among the living, or lest we think that something of us can remain after death, when the body and the nature of the soul have been destroyed together, and have produced a parting, each to its own first beginnings. I say, therefore, that semblances and fine shapes of things are sent out from things, from their outer surface. This can be understood no matter how dull one's mind from what follows. But since I have shown of what sort are the beginnings of all things, and how differing in their various shapes, they fly around on their own, stirred up by eternal motion, and how from them all things are able to be created, now I will begin to treat for you what closely relates to these things, that there exist what we call likenesses of things, which must be termed, so to speak, films or bark, because the image bears an appearance and shape like that thing, whatever it is, from the body of which it is said to be shed and wander forth. First of all, since in the case of visible things, many things give off bodies, in part scattered loosely, as wood gives off smoke, and fire heat, and in part more closely woven and compacted, just as at times when cicadas shed their smoothly rounded clothing in summer, and when calves, being born, give off films from their outer surface, and likewise when a slippery serpent sheds its covering on thorns, for we often see bushes decorated with their fluttering body armor. Since those things happen, a thin image must also be sent out from things, from their outer surface. For why those should fall and recede from things more than those which are thin, there is no possibility of uttering, especially since there exist on the outer surface of things bodies, which are many and minute, which can be thrown off in the same order which they had before, and preserve the outline of the shape, and much more quickly, being less able to be impeded, inasmuch as they are few and are located right up front. For surely we see many things toss out and lavishly give up bodies, not only from deep within, as we said before, but often from their surface, and even their very color. And awnings commonly do this, yellow, red, and purple, when they are stretched over large theaters, and flutter and wave above people on masts and beams. For there they tint the crowd in their seats below, and the whole spectacle of the stage, the senators, and the mother of the gods, and make them flutter and flow with their own colors. And the more the walls of the theater encircle and enclose, the more all these things within are soaked with splendor, and laugh when the light of day is diminished. Therefore, since awnings emit color from their outer surfaces, all things must also emit fine semblances, since in both cases they are throwing off from their surfaces. There are therefore then fixed outlines of shapes, which freely fly around endowed with subtle texture, and which are not able to be seen singly or separately. Moreover, all odor, smoke, heat, and other things similar, pour out and stream away from things for this reason, since as they are arising and coming out from deep within, they are split up on their winding journey, nor are there straight passageways by which they can hasten to arise and depart together. But in contrast, when a fine film of surface color is sent forth, there is nothing which can rip it apart, since it is close by and located right up front. Finally, whatever reflections are visible to us in mirrors, on water, and on very shiny surfaces, seeing that they are endowed with an appearance similar to the objects, must consist of images sent off from the objects. There are thus thin patterns of things and similar semblances, which though singly no one is able to see, nevertheless by continuous and frequent repulsion they rebuff and return a visible image from the surface of mirrors. In no other way can they possibly ensure that appearances so greatly resembling each thing are returned. Now come, perceive how fine the nature of an image is, and first of all, since the first beginnings are so far below the reach of our senses and are so much smaller than the things which our eyes first begin to be unable to make out, now nevertheless, so that I might convince you of this too, perceive in brief how very fine are the beginnings of all things. First, there exist some living creatures so small that it is impossible to make out 1/3 of their body. What must we think a little portion of their intestines is like? What of the sphere of their heart or eyes? What of their limbs, appendages? How tiny are they? Even more, what about the individual first beginnings from which their soul and the nature of their mind must be composed? Don't you see how fine and how incredibly small they are? And next, whatever things breathe out from their body a strong odor, panacées, foul wormwood, heavy-smelling southernwood, bitter centauri, if by chance you touch any one of these things lightly between two fingers, lacuna. But that you should realize that images of things wander about, many in a multitude of manners, with no power, unperceived. But lest by chance you think that the only things which wander about are those images of things which depart from things, there are also those that are produced spontaneously, and themselves are formed in this part of the sky that is called the air. These are formed in a multitude of manners and borne aloft, just as we sometimes see that clouds easily gather on high and spoil the serene beauty of the sky, caressing the air as they move. For often giants' faces appear to be airborne and cast shadows far and wide. Sometimes majestic mountains and rocks, ripped from mountains, seem to go ahead and pass before the sun. Then a monster seems to drag and pull in other clouds. They never stop dissolving, changing their shapes, and turning into the outlines of shapes of every kind. Now, how easily and quickly these images are created, and how unceasingly they flow from things and slip off and depart. Lacuna. For something on the surface is always flowing from things, which they cast off. When it reaches some things, it passes through, especially glass. But when it reaches rough rock or building timber, then at once it is dispersed, so it is not able to return the image. But when things that stay shiny and solid have been interposed, especially like a mirror, neither of these things occurs. For neither can they pass through as with glass, nor on the contrary be dispersed. The smoothness remembers to preserve their safety. Therefore it happens that the images flow back from it to us. And however suddenly, at whatever time you place a mirror in front of each thing, an image appears, so that you may realize that constantly flowing from the outer surface of things are thin textures and thin shapes. Therefore many images are produced in a short time, so that deservedly the birth of these things is said to be quick. And just as the sun must send out much light in a short time, so that all things are constantly filled by it, so likewise, for a similar reason, it is necessary that images be carried off from things in a moment of time, many in a multitude of manners, everywhere in all directions. Since wherever we turn the mirror towards the shapes of things, objects answer back there with similar shape and color. Moreover, when the weather in the sky has just now been brilliantly clear, all of a sudden it becomes stormy and foul, so that you think that on all sides darkness has left Acheron behind and fills up the vast caverns of the sky. So greatly, when the bleak night of clouds has arisen, do the faces of black fear hang over us from above. How small a part of the clouds an image is, there is no one who can say, nor render an account of it in words. Now come, with how swift a motion the images are carried along, and what quickness has been granted them as they swim across the air, so that a brief hour is consumed in covering a great distance, in whatever direction each aims with different impulses. I will set out with verses that are few but sweetly spoken. Just so is the short song of the swan better than the crane's clamor scattered among the clouds of heaven on the south wind. First, frequently we may see that things which are light and made up of tiny particles are quick. Now of this sort are the light of the sun and its heat, because they are made up of tiny first bodies, which are hammered, so to speak, and do not stop traveling through the intervening air, since they are struck by blows from behind. For light is immediately reinforced by more light, and, as if in succession, spark is goaded on by spark. Therefore, by similar reasoning, images must be able to traverse an inconceivably large distance in an instant of time. First, because there is a cause which, though tiny, pushes and propels them at a distance from behind. In addition, because they are carried along with such rapid lightness Next, because they are sent off endowed with such a fine texture that they can easily penetrate all sorts of things and percolate through, so to speak, the intervening air. Moreover, if those particles of things which are sent forth from deep down within, like the light of the sun and its heat, are seen in an instant of a day to flow and diffuse themselves through the sky's whole space, and to fly through sea and lands and drench the sky, what then about those that are now ready right on the surface, when they are shot off and nothing impedes their release? Don't you see that they should travel more rapidly and farther, and cover many times the extent of space in the same time in which the light of the sun spreads across the sky? This also seems to be an exceptionally good demonstration of with how swift a motion the images of things are carried along. That as soon as the gleam of water is placed beneath the heavens when the sky is star-strewn, immediately the peaceful stars of the firmament answer back glimmering in the water. Don't you see then how in an instant of time an image falls from the shores of heaven to the shores of earth? Wherefore, again and again, it must be admitted that with wondrous bodies which strike the eyes and stir up sight, and odors flow off continuously from certain things, just like coolness from rivers, heat from the sun, and spray from the waves of the sea, the gnaw of walls along the shore. Nor do various voices ever forego flying through the air. Lastly, a salty tasting moisture often forms in our mouths when we spend time near the sea. But when we see wormwood being diluted and mixed, a bitter taste is experienced. So from all things, each thing in a flow is carried away, and is sent off everywhere in all directions. Neither delay nor any respite is given to the flowing, since we continuously receive sensations, and it is always permitted that we see all things, smell them, and sense their sound. Moreover, since any shape which is felt by the hands in darkness is recognized to be the same as that which is seen in bright and brilliant light, it is necessary that touch and sight are stimulated by a similar cause. Now then, if we handle a cube and it registers with us in the dark, in the light what thing will be able to strike our sight as a cube, if not the image of the object? It is in images, therefore, that the source of perceiving is seen to be, nor without them is anything able to be seen. Now those which I am calling the images of things are carried along everywhere, and are tossed and scattered in all directions. But since we are able to see with our eyes alone, it therefore happens that wherever we turn our sight, all things there strike it directly with their shape and color. And how far each thing is distant from us, the image makes us see and helps us distinguish. For when it is emitted, immediately it thrusts forward and drives whatever air lies between it and our eyes. And thus the air all glides through our eyes, and, as it were, brushes through our pupils, and thus goes by. It therefore happens that we see how far off is each thing, and the more air is set in motion ahead of it, and the longer the breeze brushes through our eyes, the farther off each thing is seen to be. Of course, these things are carried out with amazing speed, so that we see simultaneously what a thing is and how far away. This, in these matters, must not be thought remarkable in the least. Why, although those images which strike the eyes cannot be seen individually, the objects themselves are perceived. For although the wind batters us little by little, and although cold flows fiercely, we are not used to feeling each individual particle of this wind or cold. but rather the whole all at once, and then we see blows produced on our bodies, just as if some thing were battering us and providing a feeling of its body externally. Additionally, when we tap on a rock with our finger, we touch the very outer surface color of the rock, and we do not feel the color by touch, but rather we feel the very hardness of the rock deep within. Now come, see why the image is seen beyond the mirror, for it certainly is seen far off deep inside. It is just as those things which are actually viewed outside, when a door provides an open view through itself, and enables many things to be seen outside the house. This sight too is caused by twin streams of air. For first then the air this side of the doors is discerned. Next the doors themselves to the right and left follow. Afterwards the outside light brushes through our eyes, and a second air, and those things which are actually viewed outside. So when an image of a mirror first projects itself forward, while it is coming to our vision, it thrusts forward and drives whatever air is located between it and our eyes, and makes it so that we perceive all this air before the mirror. But when we have perceived the mirror itself too, immediately the image which is carried from us to it reaches us after it has rebounded back and returned, and rolls along propelling another air before it, and makes it so that we see that before it, and thus it appears to be so far distant from the mirror. Therefore, again and again, it is not at all right to wonder, lacuna, for those things which return a vision from the surface of mirrors, since the result in either case involves two airs. Now it happens that the part of our limbs on the right side appears to be on the left side in mirrors, because when the image reaches and strikes the flat surface of the mirror, it is not reversed without change, but is driven straight back, just as if someone, before a plaster mask has dried, were to strike it hard against a column or a beam, and if it immediately were to preserve its shape directly in front, and were itself to reproduce itself driven backwards. So it will happen that what was the right eye before is itself now the left, and from the left in turn comes the right. It happens also that an image is passed from mirror to mirror, so that even 5 or 6 reflections can often be produced. For whatever things are hidden back within the interior of a house, however distant along a twisting path deep within, still all these can be extracted from within along bending paths by many mirrors, and be seen to be in the house. Thus the image is reflected from mirror to mirror, and when the left is transmitted, it comes about that it becomes the right, but then again reverses and returns right to where it was. Then again, whenever curved sides of mirrors possess a curvature like that of our own sides, they return correct reflections for these reasons, either because the image is transported from a part of the mirror to another, whence it is struck twice and flies to us, or perhaps because the image is moved around when it has arrived, because the curved surface of the mirror teaches it to rotate towards us. Further, please suppose that our reflections proceed and plant their steps along with us and imitate our movements, because whatever part of the mirror you vacate, immediately reflections cannot be returned from there. Seeing that nature compels everything to return and rebound from things rendered back at equal angles. The eyes also shun and avoid gazing at brilliant objects. The sun even brings blindness if you proceed to look straight at it, since its force is great and its images are borne along from on high through the pure air with significant effect, striking the eyes and upsetting the way they are structured. Besides, when a bright flash is sharp, it often burns the eye because it contains many seeds of fire, which produce pain for the eyes by winding their way in. So too all things jaundiced people see turn pale yellow, because many seeds of pale yellow flow from their body to meet the images of things, and many seeds are also mixed in their eyes, which by their contagion dye everything with their paleness. But while in darkness we view things which are in the light, because when the black air of darkness, which is closer, enters first and occupies the open eyes, bright brilliant air at once follows along and cleans them out, as it were, and disperses the black shadows of that former air. For the latter air is many times more mobile, many times smaller and more powerful. As soon as it fills the passages of the eyes with light, and opens those which the black air had blocked before, immediately there follow the images of things which are located in the light, and they stimulate us to see. But in contrast, we are unable to see from light into darkness, because the air of darkness enters second and is much thicker. It fills up every pore and blocks the passages of the eyes, so that none of the images of things can be projected on them and move them. When we see from afar the square towers of a city, it happens that they often appear rounded for this reason, because every angle looks blunt at a distance, or rather it is not discerned, and its blow perishes, and its force does not slip all the way through to our vision. Since, while the images are carried along through much air, the air forces it to grow dull through frequent collisions. Thus, when every angle similarly slips by our senses, it happens that structures of stone are rounded as if on a lathe, still not like those which are truly round close up, but they appear somewhat similar in shadowy form. Likewise, it appears to us that a shadow moves in the sun and follows our footsteps and imitates our gestures, if you believe that air deprived of light can advance, following the motions and gestures of people. For that thing which we are accustomed to call a shadow is nothing other than air devoid of light. Of course, because the earth is deprived successively in certain places of the light of the sun wherever we stroll along and block it, and likewise the portion of it we left is filled back up, it therefore happens that what used to be the shadow of the body seems ever to stay the same and follow us straight along. For new rays of light are always pouring forth, and old ones perish, like wool is spun into a fire. Therefore the earth is easily stripped of light and refilled again, washing off black shadows from itself. Nor yet do we admit that the eyes are at all deceived in this, for it belongs to them to see at whatever point there is light and shadow. But whether the lights are the same or not, or whether it is the same shadow which was here and now moves over there, or whether it rather happens as we said a little before, this the reasoning power of the mind alone should determine, nor are the eyes able to know the nature of things. Thus do not falsely attribute this fault of the mind to the eyes. A ship on which we are riding moves, although it seems to be motionless. The one which remains stationary is believed to be passing by. And the hills and plains appear to flee astern as we ride our ship past them and soar along on sails. All the stars appear motionless, fixed in their heavenly vaults, yet they are all in a state of continuous motion, since they rise and return to their faraway settings, when they have measured out the sky with brilliant body. Likewise, the sun and moon appear to remain stationary, although the facts themselves show they are in motion. And mountains rising far distant from the middle of the deep, among which a wide and free passage lies open for ships, still, it appears, a single island is formed from them all joined together. That halls are spinning and columns running around appear so certain to children when they themselves have stopped twirling, that they scarcely can now believe that all the walls are not threatening to crash down on top of them. And further, when nature begins to lift up the light of dawn red with flickering flames and to raise it above the mountains, the mountains above which the sun then appears to be close by, and touching and burning with its fire. Scarcely are they distant from us 2,000 arrow shots, scarcely even 500 javelin casts. Between them and the sun lie huge expanses of sea stretched out beneath vast shores of heaven, and lying between are many thousands of lands, which different peoples and generations of wild beasts occupy. But a puddle of water no deeper than a finger's breadth, which lies between the stones on the pavement of the street, provides a view beneath the earth as great in extent as the lofty gap of heaven opens above the earth, so that you seem to look down at clouds and see the sky and bodies hidden wondrously in the sky beneath the earth. Next, when a spirited horse of ours has halted in the middle of a stream and we have looked down on the rapid waters of the river, a force appears to carry the body of the horse sideways, though it is standing still, and to thrust it rapidly against the current, and wherever we cast our eyes, everything appears to be carried along and to flow in a manner similar to ourselves. Next, although a colonnade has equal lines and stands supported throughout on uniform columns, still, when its entire length is viewed from the end, gradually it contracts into the apex of a narrow cone, joining the roof to the ground and everything on the right to the left, until the point of the cone contracts into obscurity. To sailors at sea it happens that the sun appears to rise from the waters and set and hide in its light in the waves. Of course, since they gaze at nothing else but water and sky. Do not lightly assume that the senses are undermined from all sides. But those ignorant of the sea, ships in port seem deformed and to be pressing down on the waves with shattered sternposts. For whatever part of the oars is raised above the salty dew is straight, and rudders too are straight above. Those parts which are submerged and penetrate the water all appear to be broken and to be twisted back upwards again, and almost to be bent back and float on top of the water. And when the winds carry along scattered clouds through the sky at night time, then the sparkling celestial signs appear, to glide along against the clouds and travel high above, in a direction far different than they are carried on their true course. But if by chance your hand is placed beneath one eye and presses it, by a certain sensation it happens that all things which we look at appear to be double even as we look, double the light of lamps flowering in flames, double the furniture throughout the entire house is replicated, and duplicated are the faces of people, their bodies double. And next, when sleep overcomes the limbs with sweet slumber, and the whole body lies in deep repose, then nevertheless we seem to be awake and move our limbs, and in the sordid gloom of night we think we see the sun and light of day. And though we are in an enclosed space, we seem to visit sky, sea, rivers, mountains, and traverse plains on foot, and to hear sounds when the absolute silence of night is everywhere, and to offer up words in our speechlessness. We see an amazing number of things of this type, all of which seek to shatter one's trust, so to speak, in the senses, but in vain, since by far the largest part of these deceive because of the inferences of the mind, which we ourselves contribute, so that things not seen by the senses are taken as things seen. For nothing is more difficult than to distinguish clear things from doubtful ones which the mind adds immediately on its own. Next, if anyone thinks that nothing is known, he also doesn't know whether this can be known, since he admit he knows nothing. So I will cease pleading my case against such a person, who on his own has stuck his head where his feet belong. And yet, even if I concede he knows this, still this very thing I will ask. Since he has never found any truth in things before, from where does he know what it is to know and not know in turn? What thing created the concept of true and false? And what thing has demonstrated that the doubtful differs from the sure? You will find that the concept of truth is created first of all from the senses, and that the senses cannot be refuted. For greater trust ought to be granted to this, which on its own is able to overcome false things with true. What ought to be held in greater trust than the senses? Or will reason, having arisen from false sensation, be strong enough to speak against the senses when it arose completely from the senses? Unless they are true, reason too becomes completely false. Or can the ears refute the eyes, or touch refute the ears? Or further, will the mouth's sense of taste argue with this touch, or will the nostrils refute it, or the eyes defeat it? I think not. For to each sense a function has been separately assigned, each has its own power, and thus it is necessary that you sense what is soft and what is cold or hot separately, and sense separately the various colors of things, to see whatever things are joined to colors. Separately, too, the mouth's sense of taste has its force. Separately, smells arise, separately sounds. And so it is necessary that the senses cannot prove each other wrong. And further, they cannot refute themselves, since equal trust must always be granted them. Accordingly, that which has appeared to the senses on each occasion is true, and if reason is unable to unravel the cause, why those things which were square close up, when far off seem round, still it is preferable, lacking reason, to give a false account of the causes of each shape, than to let fully evident things fall anywhere from our hands and shatter our primary trust and shake all the foundations on which our life and safety rely. For not only would all reason be ruined, but life itself also would cease at once, unless you dare to trust the senses and shun dangerously high places, and other things of this sort, which must be avoided, and seek out things just the opposite. Therefore your supply of words is completely empty, which you have drawn up and positioned against the senses. And next, as in construction, if the carpenter's rule is warped at the start, and if the square deceptively deviates from straight lines, and if the level is off at all in any part, all the structures must turn out full of problems, crooked, warped, bulging in front and back, and discordant. So they seem to want to collapse at once, and they do collapse, since they all were betrayed by false judgments at the start. So too your reasoning about things must be warped and false when it has arisen from false senses. Now, to understand how each of the other senses senses its own object requires no rocky road of reasoning. First, every sound and voice is heard when they have worked their way into the ears and struck the sense organ with their body. For it must be admitted that the voice too is bodily, and so also is sound, since they are able to strike upon the senses. Moreover, the voice often scrapes the throat, and shouting makes the trachea rougher as it makes its way outside. Naturally, when the first beginnings of voices are gathered in a great throng and begin to go outside, doubtless when the throat is full, the door of the mouth is also scraped. Therefore, there is no doubt at all that voices and words are composed of bodily first beginnings, so that they can cause injury. Nor likewise does it deceive you about how much body a continuous speech removes, and what it takes out of the physical power and strength of people, when it is stretched out from the rising brilliance of dawn to the gloom of black night, especially if it is delivered at the top of one's voice. Therefore it must be that the voice is bodily, since when someone speaks a lot he loses part of his body. Furthermore, roughness of the voice comes from roughness of the first beginnings, and likewise smoothness is created by smoothness. Nor do the first beginnings of the same shape penetrate the ear when a trumpet rumbles deeply with a low roar, and quickly reverberates wildly back a raucous rumble, as when swans from the twisting valleys of Mount Helicon lift their clear lament with saddened voice. And so, when from deep within we squeeze out from our body these voices and send them straight out through our mouth, the agile tongue, artificer of words, divides them into parts, and the shaping of the lips in turn forms them. Thus, when the space is not long from which each voice is launched and arrives, it also must happen that the words themselves are clearly heard and understood sound by sound. For the voice preserves its shaping and preserves its forming. But if the space in between is longer than is optimal, the words must be jumbled about through a lot of air, and the voice mixed about, while it flies through the breezes. And so it happens that you are able to sense sounds and not distinguish what the meaning of the words is. To such an extent the voice arrives confused and impeded. Moreover, a single word sent from a crier's mouth often stirs the ears of everyone in a crowd. Therefore, in an instant, one voice breaks up into many voices, since it divides itself for individual ears, affixing a shape and a clear sound to words. But that part of the voices which does not fall on the ears passes by and perishes uselessly scattered on the breezes. Part, striking solid places and rebounding, return the voice and at times delude us with the image of a word. When you see this well, you indeed may be able to render a reason, both for yourself and others, of how through remote locales, rocks send back matching shapes of words in order, and when we look for our scattered friends in the shadowy mountains, and summon them with a great shout when they all are spread out. Even 6 or 7 voices I have seen places return when you admit one. And so hills to hills spontaneously were sending back and reiterating words taught to them. Locals imagine that goat-footed satyrs and nymphs inhabit these places, and say that there are fauns. It is by their night-wandering shriek and playful shriekery, they commonly say, that the still silence is broken, and the sounds of strings arise, and the sweet complaints which the flute pours forth, pressed by the fingers of the players. In addition, they say, the country-dwelling sort commonly senses it when Pan, shaking the covering of pine on his half-civilized head, often with his curving lip, runs over the open reeds, so that his pipes may not stop issuing their sylvan muse. They tell of other odd creatures and portents of this sort, so that they might not be thought perhaps to live in remote locales, deserted even by the gods. Thus with words they boast of wonders, or they are led on by some other reason, since the entire human race is too eager of ears. As to what remains, we must not wonder how, through the places the eye are unable to see things openly, through the same places voices arrive and stimulate the ears. Often, too, we perceive a discussion though the doors are closed, doubtless because the voice can make its way through the twisted passageways of things intact, while visual images refuse. For they are ripped apart unless they sail through straight passageways like those of glass, through which every image passes. Moreover, a voice is split up in all directions, since some are produced from others, when one, once it has arisen, has sprung apart into many, just as a fire spark is so often accustomed to spread itself out into fires. Therefore, places hidden far from sight are filled with voices, and they all boil over and are stirred up by sound. But all visual images travel by direct paths, just as they are first sent off. Thus no one can see them beyond walls, but can receive voices through them. And yet, even the voice itself, passing through closed-off rooms in houses, is dulled and enters the ears in a confused state, and we seem to hear mere sounds rather than distinct words. Nor are the tongue and palate by which we sense flavor any more difficult to understand or more difficult to explain. First, we sense flavor in the mouth when we squeeze it out as we chew our food, as when someone by chance begins with his hand to squeeze and remove the moisture from a sponge loaded with water. Next, what we squeeze out is distributed through all the pores of the palate and the twisted passageways of the loosened tongue. Therefore, when the bodies of the dripping, savory juices are smooth, sweetly they make contact and sweetly they touch entirely the moist, salivating regions located around the tongue. But in contrast, bodies assail these senses and cause damage by their attack to the extent that they each are more replete with sharp roughness. Next, pleasure from flavors does not extend past the palate. Indeed, when it falls straight down through the jaws, there is no pleasure, while it is all being distributed in the limbs. Nor does it matter with what food the body is nourished, so long as what you take in you are able to digest and distribute among the limbs and safeguard the moist tenor of the stomach. Now how a thing can be food for some creatures and poison for others, I will explain, or why what is bitter and harsh to some still nonetheless has the power to seem very sweet to others. And so great is the distance and difference in these things, that what is food to one creature is harsh poison to others. Thus there is even a snake that when touched by human saliva, perishes and commits suicide by gnawing away at itself. Moreover, the hellebore plant is toxic poison to us, but it adds soft fat to goats and quails. So that you might be able to understand how this happens, it is first helpful to recall the things we said before, that the seeds are found mixed in things in a variety of ways. Furthermore, all living creatures that ingest food, just as they are dissimilar on the outside and the external configuration of their limbs is determined each according to kind, so also are they made up of seeds of varying shape. Since, furthermore, their seeds vary, it is also necessary that their intervals and paths, which we call passages, differ throughout all the limbs, in the mouth and also in the palate itself. Thus some passages must be smaller and some larger. Some living creatures must have triangular passages, others square. Many are round, others are multi-angled in many ways. For just as the arrangement of shapes and the motions require, in that way should the shapes of the passages differ, and the paths vary in the way the structure compels them. Therefore, when what is sweet to some becomes bitter to others, the one for whom it is sweet must have the smoothest bodies slowly and caressingly enter the openings belonging to his palate, while to those for whom the same things are bitter within, doubtless rough and hooked things enter their openings. Now, it is easy from these things to understand everything. For indeed, when someone contracts a fever and the bile rises, or in some other way a disease process is set off, then the entire body is thrown into confusion, and all the arrangements of the first beginnings are then changed around. The result is that bodies which before were suitable to sensation now are not suitable, and others fit better, both which when they have entered are able to produce a better sensation. Both sorts of seeds are mixed together in the flavor of honey. This we have already often demonstrated to you before. Now come, and I will explain how the impact of smell touches the nostrils. First, there must be many things from which a diverse flood of smells flows and emanates, and we must suppose that they flow, disperse, and scatter everywhere. But different types of smells are more suited to different creatures because of differing shapes. And so through the gentle breezes, bees are attracted by the smell of honey no matter what the distance, and vultures by dead bodies. Moreover, wherever the cloven hoof of beasts has planted a step, the violence of dogs unleashed pushes on, and the odor of men is sensed from afar by the white goose, the savior of the citadel of Romulus's descendants. Thus different smells are given to different creatures, and lead each to its own food, and forces it to recoil from bitter poison, and in this way the generations of creatures are preserved. Therefore, this very smell that is able to activate the nose is such that one smell can be spread further than another. But still in no way can any of them be carried as far as a sound, as a voice, not to mention as those things which strike the pupils of the eyes and activate vision. Smell goes wafting around slowly and soon perishes, easily sundered little by little in the breezes of the air. First, because it is emitted with difficulty from deep within a thing. That smells flow and depart from far within things is shown by the fact that all things that are broken, that are crushed, that are liquefied by fire seem to give off smells more strongly. Second, it can be seen that smells are made of larger first beginnings than voices, since they do not penetrate a stone wall, through which voices and sounds commonly carry. Therefore, you will also see that it is not an easy thing to track down in what area a smell is located, for the impact grows cold as it tarries about in the breezes, nor do the messengers of things run hot to the senses. Thus dogs often roam around and search for traces. Nor is this the case only for smells and the class of flavors, but in similar fashion the appearances of things and shades of colors are not also suited to the senses of all living creatures, that certain things are not too piercing for the vision of some. Yes, even the cock, who drives the night away by beating its wings, and is wont to summon the dawn with its clear-pitched cry, is such that enraged lions cannot take their stand before it and gaze upon it, so mindful are they at once of fleeing. Doubtless because in the body of the cock there are certain seeds which, when let fly into the eyes of lions, enter and stab their pupils and give them piercing pain, so that for all their ferociousness they simply cannot hold out against it. Yet these things lack all power to harm our sight, either because they do not penetrate, or because when they penetrate, a free exit from our eyes is provided, so they will not, by delaying, be able to damage any part of the apparatus of sight. Now come, hear about the things that move the mind, and briefly learn from where comes that which comes into the mind. To begin, I say this: many images of things move about to and fro in many ways and in every direction. They are very fine and easily joined together in the breezes when they come into contact, like spider's web and gold leaf. For indeed these images are much more fine in texture than those which take hold of the eyes and strike the faculty of sight, since these pass through the pores of the body and stir the fine nature of the mind within and provoke sensation. And so we gaze upon centaurs and body parts of Scyllas and Cerberus-like faces of dogs, and images of those who have met death and whose bones the earth embraces. Since images of every sort are carried along everywhere, some of which occur on their own accord in the air itself, some of which shoot back from things of various sorts, and which are jointly formed and created from the shapes of these. For surely the image of a centaur does not derive from a living creature, since no nature of any such animal ever existed. But when the image of a horse and man chance to come together, they stick together easily and at once, as we said before, on account of their subtle nature and thin texture. Other things of this type are created in the same manner. Since these things are carried along quickly with amazing lightness, as I showed before, any single subtle image easily moves from our minds by a single blow, for the mind is itself thin and marvelously mobile. That these things happen, as I say, you can easily understand from this. Since the two are similar, what we see with the mind and what we see with the eyes, it must be that they happen by a similar process. Now therefore, since I have shown that I see, for example, a lion by means of images which strike my eyes, one may realize that the mind is moved by a similar process, by images of a lion and other things which it sees equally, no less than the eyes, except that it perceives much finer images. Nor in any other way, when sleep drains our limbs, is the rational part of our intellect awake, except because these same images strike our minds as when we are awake, to such an extent that we seem certainly to see him whom, once life has departed, death and earth now possess. Nature compels this to happen thus, because all the senses of the body are blocked off and lay quiet throughout the limbs, nor can they refute what is false by true facts. Moreover, the memory lies helpless and languishes in sleep, and does not protest that the person whom the mind thinks it sees alive was overcome by death and destruction long ago. Moreover, it is not remarkable at all that the images move and shift their arms and other limbs in smooth succession. For it happens that an image in sleep seems to do this, since, when the first image perishes and another is then born, with a different position, the first seems to have changed its posture. Of course, this must be thought to occur in rapid fashion, so great is the mobility, so great the plentiful supply of images, so great the supply of particles in any one noticeable moment of time, so that a ready source is available. Many questions are raised about these things, and many must be answered by us if we desire to explain things clearly. First, it is asked why, whatever someone wants to consider, immediately his mind thinks the very thing. Do images really keep watch over our wills, and as soon as we wish an image hurries to meet us? Whether it is dear to our hearts to think of sea, earth, or sky? Gatherings of people, a ceremonial procession, banquets, battles. Does nature create and make ready all of them at a word? And that too, although others in the same vicinity and location have their minds thinking of all sorts of very different things. What further, when we see images move forward in smooth succession in sleep, and shift supple limbs about, when they stretch out supple arms in rapid alternation and repeat for our eyes the gesture with the foot also in step, the images are certainly steeped in art and circulate, highly trained, so they can present their productions at nighttime. Or rather will the following turn out to be true. Since in a single time, which we perceive, that is, when a single sound is emitted, many times are concealed which reason discovers to exist. Because of this, it happens that in whatever time you wish, appropriate images are present ready in each place. So great is the mobility, so great the plentiful supply of things. Thus, when the first image perishes and another is born, from there with a different position, the first seems to have changed its posture. And since they are thin, the mind cannot see sharply any except those to which it attends. So all which exist besides perish, except those for which the mind has prepared itself. It prepares itself, moreover, and hopes that it actually happens, that it sees what follows upon each thing, and therefore it happens. Don't you see that the eyes, too, when they begin to discern things that are fine, attend and prepare themselves, and that without this it is not possible that we see sharply? And nevertheless, in the visible realm, too, you are able to notice that if you do not turn your mind to a thing, then it is as if it has been separated and far removed the whole time. So why is it surprising if the mind lets other things go except for those things to which it has given itself? Moreover, we base large conjectures on small evidence and entangle ourselves in being deceived through self-deception. It happens, too, that sometimes an image of the same kind is not readily supplied, but what was a woman before seems to be present close at hand changed into a man. Or one face or one age follows upon others. Sleep and forgetfulness ensure we are not amazed by this. We avidly desire that you avoid this mistake in these matters, and that you try to escape error by anticipating it anxiously, in order not to represent the clear vision of the eyes as created, so that we can gaze ahead, or that for us to be able to advance with long strides, therefore the tops of the calves and thighs, resting on the foundation of the feet, have the ability to be bent and folded, and further that the forearms are fitted to strong upper arms, and that hands have been given us as helpers on both sides, so that we might be able to do what is necessary to support life. Other things of this sort that people expound are all backwards, the product of upside-down reasoning, since nothing arises in the body so that we might make use of it, but that which arises in the body creates its own use. Neither did seeing exist before the light of the eyes arose, nor did beseeching with words exist before the tongue was created. But rather the birth of the tongue came far sooner than speech, and the ears were created much earlier than sound was heard. And in short, all parts of the body existed, I believe, before there existed a use for them. Thus they were not able to evolve for the sake of using them, But in contrast, to make trial with one's hand at the contests of battle, and to tear apart limbs and to befoul body parts with gore, were aroused long before gleaming missiles flew, and nature forced people to watch out for wounds before the left arm was trained to interpose a shield. And of course, to give over the exhausted body to sleep is of much greater antiquity than the soft folds of a bed, and to quench thirst came into existence earlier than cups. These things, therefore, which were invented out of the needs of life, can be thought to have been discovered for the sake of using them. But all those things are quite separate, which themselves arose before conveying a concept of their own usefulness. We see that first, in this case, are the senses and limbs. Therefore, again and again, there is no way you can believe that they could have been created for the purpose of utility. This, likewise, is not to be wondered at, that on its own the nature of the body of each animal seeks food. For indeed I have demonstrated that many bodies flow and exit from things in many ways, but even more must flow from living creatures. Since the bodies are driven out by motion, and many, squeezed from deep within, are carried off by sweat, many exhaled through the mouth, when they grow tired and pant. By these things therefore the body grows thin, and its whole nature is undermined. Pain ensues from this. Therefore food is taken to prop up the limbs, and placed in between to restore strength, and stop up the gaping desire for eating throughout the limbs and veins. Likewise moisture disperses into all the places which have need of moisture. Many particles of heat gather together and expose our stomachs to a destructive conflagration. These the approaching liquid scatters and extinguishes like fire, so that the arid heat cannot scorch our appendages any longer. In this way, therefore, is the breathtaking thirst washed away from our body. In this way is the hungry desire filled up. Now how it happens that we are able to advance our steps forward when we will it, and how it is given to move our limbs variously, and what thing is accustomed to thrust forward the large mass of our body, I will relate. You hear what I say. I say that first images of moving fall upon our mind, and strike the mind, as we have said before. Thence the will happens, for no one begins to do anything before the mind sees in advance what it wishes. That which it sees in advance, an image of that thing is present. Therefore, when the mind so stirs itself that it wishes to go and to move forward, it immediately strikes the power of the soul, which is spread out through the limbs and joints in the whole body. And it is easy to do, since the soul is held in close connection with it. Thence the soul in turn strikes the body, and thus gradually the whole mass is thrust forward and moved. In addition, then, the body also becomes rarefied, and air, as of course it must, since it is always quick to move, enters and penetrates through the opened passageways in abundance, and is dispersed all about to each and every tiny part of the body. Here it then happens by two things working together, that the body is carried along, like a ship by sails and wind. Nor nevertheless is this to be wondered at in these things, that such tiny little bodies can twist so great a body about and change the direction of our entire weight. For indeed a light wind with a body of fine texture drives and pushes a massive ship with massive effort, and one hand controls it going at whatever speed, and one steering oar twists it about wherever you wish. And by pulleys and wheels a machine is able to move and lift many things of heavy weight with light effort. Now in what ways this sleep floods the limbs with rest and releases the cares of the mind from the chest, I will relate in verses more sweetly spoken than they are many, just as the brief song of the swan is better than that clamor of cranes, which is scattered on the ethereal clouds of the south wind. You, give me discriminating ears and a discerning mind. So you do not keep on denying that what I say is possible, and depart with your chest beating back my true words, although you yourself are at fault and are not able to see it. First, sleep occurs when the force of the soul has been scattered throughout the limbs, when part is driven outside and withdraws, and part is pushed back and withdraws more deeply within. It is then at last that the limbs are loosened and go limp. For there is no doubt that it is the soul's work that is responsible for this consciousness in us. When sleep prevents it from occurring, then we must think that the soul has been thrown into turmoil and has been driven outside, but not all of it, for then the body would lie suffused with the everlasting chill of death. For indeed, when no part of the soul remains hidden in the limbs, just as fire often hides covered by many ashes, from what source could consciousness be rekindled suddenly throughout our limbs, just as flames spring from hidden fire? But from what things this new state occurs, and from what source the soul can be thrown into confusion, and the body droop, I will explain. See that I do not toss words to the wind. First, it must be that the body's exterior surface, since it is touched by the airy breezes that surround it, is struck repeatedly and beaten by frequent blows of air, and therefore almost all things are covered either by thick hide or also by seashell or hard skin or bark. This same air also beats on the insides of animals as they breathe, when it is brought in and exhaled back out. Therefore, since the body is buffeted differently on both sides, and since the blows penetrate all the way through the small openings of our bodies to the first parts and first elements, a gradual collapse, so to speak, occurs throughout our limbs. For the arrangements of the first beginnings of body and soul are thrown into confusion. It then happens that part of the soul is driven out, and part withdraws hidden within. And a part also is broken up throughout the limbs, and is unable to be joined together and execute motions as a group. For nature cuts and blocks off its meetings and passageways. Therefore consciousness departs deep within when the motions are disturbed. And since there is nothing which props up the limbs, so to speak, the body becomes feeble and all the limbs go slack. Arms and eyelids droop, and when you recline, the knees are often bent and let go of their strength. Next, sleep follows food, since what air does, sleep does the same thing when it is distributed throughout all the veins. And that sleep is the deepest by far, which you take when you are full or exhausted, because then numerous bodies are disturbed, weakened by their great struggle. In the same way, the withdrawal inward of part of the soul is deeper, and a larger part of it is sent outside, and it is more divided from itself and pulled apart within. And usually, to whatever pursuit a person is devoted and persistently clings, and in whatever things we have been engaged in before, and on which our mind has been more intent, in dreams we often seem to engage in the same things. Lawyers seem to plead cases and draw up contracts. Commanding officers fight and engage in battle. Sailors carry on contracted war with the winds. And I perform my task and seek the nature of things constantly, and finding it, set it out in our native language. So other pursuits and skills seem for the most part to occupy the minds of humans deceptively in dreams. Whenever anyone has devoted continuous attention to the games for many days in a row, we often observe, when they have now stopped apprehending these things with their senses, that paths still have remained open in their minds, by which the same images of things are able to enter. And so for many days these same things are observed before their eyes, so that even when they are awake they seem to see people dancing and shifting supple limbs about, and to hear with their ears the clear-voiced song of the lyre, and its speaking strings, and to see the same crowd, along with the multicolored decorations of the stage shining bright. Such a great difference eagerness and pleasure make, and in what things not only human beings are accustomed to be actively engaged, but indeed all animals. Indeed, you will see strong horses, when their limbs are reclining, in their sleep still sweat and not stop panting, and exert their greatest strength as if for the victory palm, or as if, with the starting gates open, they wanted to fly. And hunters' dogs, in soft sleep, still frequently toss their legs about suddenly, and all at once make noise, and often draw in air with their noses, as if they were glued to the tracks of wild beasts they had discovered. And, awakened from sleep, they often pursue the empty images of stags, as though they saw them given over to flight, until their delusions are dispelled and they come back to themselves. But the agreeable breed of puppies domesticated at home are quick to rouse their bodies and snatch them up from the ground, just as if they saw forms and faces they did not recognize. And to the extent that each breed of animals is wilder, the more it is necessary for them to vent their rage in sleep. But diverse creatures of the air take to flight, and all at once with their wings break the silence of the groves of the gods at night time. If in their light sleep hawks seem to offer battles and fights as they fly, and pursue them eagerly. Further, the minds of people, which from mighty motions produce mighty things, often make and act similarly in sleep. Knights lay siege, are captured, join in battle, raise a shout as if their throats are being slit on the spot. Many enter the arena and emit groans in pain, and, as if bitten by the bite of a panther or savage lion, they fill up the whole area with great shouts. Many speak about great affairs in the course of sleep, and have very often been key witnesses to their own misdeeds. Many have met death, many as though falling suddenly from high mountains to the earth with their whole body, are terrified, and as if they had lost their minds, they scarcely return to themselves from sleep, completely disturbed by the seething of their body. Likewise, someone thirsty sits beside a stream, or beautiful spring, and takes up almost an entire river with his jaws. Often, if innocents, held fast by sleep, believe that they are lifting their clothes beside a basin or shallow jar, they let out a stream of filtered liquid from their whole body, when they soak Babylonian coverlets in all their magnificent splendor. Then to those in the stormy crossing of youth, whose semen is first winding its way, when the very ripeness of time creates it in the limbs, images arrive externally from some body, messengers of a radiant face and beautiful skin color, which rouse and stimulate spots swollen with much semen, so that often, as if the whole act had occurred, they pour forth great waves of moisture and stain what they are wearing. This semen is excited in us, as we said before, as soon as the age of adulthood gives strength to our limbs. For different objects move and arouse different things, but only the power of a human rouses human seed from a human. As soon as it goes out, sent forth from its locations, it departs through the limbs and joints through the entire body, gathering in fixed places in the groin, and stirs up without delay the very genital parts of the body. The places are excited, and swell with seed, and a wish occurs to send it forth to where the awful desire strains. And the body seeks that by which the mind is wounded with love. For generally all fall toward the wound, and blood jets out in the direction from which we are struck by a stroke, and if it is close, the red liquid stains the enemy. So therefore he who receives wounds from the weapons of Venus, whether a boy with womanly limbs strikes him, or a woman radiating love with her whole body. From where he is struck, there he tends and longs to have intercourse, and to send fluid drawn from his body into the other body. For silent desire gives forewarning of future pleasure. This is our Venus. From this, too, is the name of love. From this that drop of sweet Venus first trickled into our hearts, and frigid care came after. For if what you love is absent, still there are images available of it, and its sweet name makes its way to your ears. But it is fitting to flee the images and to drive off from yourself what nourishes love, and to turn your mind elsewhere, and to send your fluid, gathered together, into whatever body, and not to retain it, once troubled by the love of one, nor to cause care and certain pain to continue for yourself. For the sore is kept alive and grows older by feeding, and daily the madness swells and the affliction grows worse, unless you overwhelm the first wounds with fresh blows, and, wandering to a widely wandering Venus, cure them while fresh, or are able to direct the motions of your mind in a different direction. Nor does the one who shuns love lack the enjoyment of Venus, but rather receives the enjoyment without the penalty. For certainly the pleasure from this is more pure for the healthy than the lovesick. For at the very moment of obtaining it, the passion of the lovers rises and falls in uncertain ways, and they are unsure what first to enjoy with their eyes and hands. What they seek they press closely and create pain in the body, and often drive their teeth hard into their lips and crush mouths together, since the pleasure is not pure, and there are hidden goads which incite them to hurt the very thing, whatever it is, from where these sprouts of madness arise. But lightly Venus breaks the punishments in the midst of their love, and the alluring pleasure intermingled holds back their biting. For in this there is hope that, where the source of their passion is, there too the flame can be extinguished from the same body. Nature, though, objects that it happens completely otherwise. And this is the one thing that the more we have of it, so much the more our breast burns with awful desire. For food and drink are taken up within by the limbs, since they are able to take up their positions at fixed places, thus the desire for liquid and bread is easily filled. Yet from the face and beautiful color of a person, nothing is given to the body to enjoy except images, insubstantial. This pitiful hope is often snatched by the wind. Just as when someone thirsty seeks to drink in his sleep, and water is not given which could extinguish the burning in his limbs, but he seeks images of liquids and works hard in vain, and is thirsty even while drinking in the midst of a rushing stream. So in a love affair Venus teases the lovers with images, nor are they able to be satisfied by gazing at the bodies before them. Nor with their hands can they rub off anything from the soft limbs as they wander without direction over the whole body. Finally, when with limbs intertwined they enjoy the flower of their age, now when the body looks forward to joys, and Venus is present there to sow the woman's fields, they fasten bodies eagerly together and join the saliva of their mouths and breathe heavily, pressing mouths to teeth, in vain, since they cannot rub off anything from there, nor penetrate, nor depart into a body with their entire bodies. For sometimes they seem to wish to do this and strive for it, so passionately do they cling together in the binding seams of Venus, while their limbs liquefy, loosened by the power of pleasure. At last, when the desire built up in the loins explodes, a small pause of the violent passion ensues for a moment. Then the same insanity returns, and this madness is back, when they seek for themselves what they themselves desire to attain. nor can they discover a device to overcome this evil. So directionless are they as they waste away from the invisible wound. Add that they squander away their wealth and perish from the effort, and that their life is led at the beck and call of another. Meanwhile, wealth slips away and becomes Babylonian coverlets. Official duties are forgotten, and reputation sickens and wavers. Lotions and beautiful Ciconian sandals sparkle on her feet, of course, and huge emeralds glowing green with light are set in gold, and the sea-purple dyed tunic is worn out continuously, and, overworked, it soaks up the sweat of Venus. The hard-earned wealth of fathers becomes headbands and headscarves, sometimes turns into a cloak or things from Elinda or Encios. Banquet feasts with exquisite tapestries and food, games, countless drinks, lotions, wreaths, and garlands are prepared, all in vain, since from the very middle of the fountain of delights something bitter surfaces, which causes distress even among the flowers. Either when the mind chances to torment itself, realizing that it is passing its life in idleness and is dying in debauched places, or because she has tossed out an ambiguous word as she left, which, embedded in his passionate heart, lives like fire, or because he thinks she glances around too much or gazes at another, and he sees the traces of laughter in her face. And these evils are found in a love that is secure and going extremely well, but in an adverse and unfulfilled love they are, as you are able to apprehend even with your eyes closed, innumerable. Thus it is better to be on guard beforehand, in the way I have shown, and to beware lest you be led astray. For to avoid being tossed into the hunting nets of love is not as difficult as once trapped exiting from the nets and bursting through the sturdy knots of Venus. And yet, although entangled and hindered, you can still escape the snare unless you get in your own way, yourself, and from the start overlook all the mental and physical faults of her whom you ardently seek and want. For people very often do this, blinded by desire, and ascribe to others qualities which in reality they do not possess. Therefore we see that those who are variously misshapen and ugly are treated as sweethearts and flourish, held in the highest esteem. For some people mock others and urge them to appease Venus, since they are afflicted with a foul love, nor do the wretches often perceive their own amazingly large problems. A dark woman is honey gold, one unwashed and filthy, natural, the light-eyed, a little Pallas, the skinny and lanky, a gazelle, the small and dwarfish, one of the graces, all pure spice, the huge and immense, an astonishment, and full of honor. She is tongue-tied and can't speak. She lisps, silent. She is modest, but the burning, tiresome gossip becomes a little torch. She becomes a slender little darling when she can't survive because she's so thin, trim when dead from a cough. But the swollen with huge breasts, Ceres herself from Iacchus, the snub-nosed, Silenus and satyr-like, the big-lipped, all kiss. It would be tiresome if I tried to mention others of this type, but nevertheless let her possess as beautiful a face as you want, and have the power of Venus emanating from all her limbs. Of course, there are others too. Of course, we lived earlier without her. Of course she does, and we know her to do, everything the same as an ugly woman, and she fumigates her poor self with foul odors while her maids flee far away and cackle in secret. But the weeping lover, shut out, often covers the threshold with flowers and garlands and anoints the proud doorposts with marjoram, and, poor wretch, plants kisses on the doors. If, once admitted, just a single whiff hits him as he is entering, he would try to find a plausible reason for leaving, and his protest, carefully considered and deeply felt, would collapse, and he would condemn himself on the spot for his stupidity, because he sees he has attributed more to her than it is right to grant to a mortal. Nor does this escape our Venuses. All the more do they themselves strive to conceal everything behind the scenes of life from those whom they wish to ensnare and to be held fast in love. All in vain, since with your mind you are able nonetheless to drag everything into the light, and to seek the reason for all the laughter, and, if she possesses an attractive mind and is not annoying, in return to overlook and concede something to her human weaknesses. Nor does a woman always sigh with feigned passion when, embracing a man, she joins body together with body, and holds him, moistening kisses with sucked lips. For she often does this from the heart, and seeking shared joys she urges him to complete the circuit of love. Nor in any other way would birds, cattle, wild beasts, sheep, and mares be able to submit to males, unless because their own nature overflowing is in heat and burns, and gladly draws in the love of the mounting mate. Don't you also see that those whom mutual pleasure overcomes are quite often tortured in common chains? For frequently dogs at the crossroads, desiring passionately to leave, pull eagerly with all their strength in opposite directions, when meanwhile they cling together in the strong bindings of Venus. This they would never do unless they experienced mutual joys which can trap them and hold them bound. Wherefore, again and again, I say pleasure is shared. And when, in the mixing of the seed, by chance the woman subdues the force of the male with sudden force and has mastered it, then offspring are born similar to the mother from maternal seed, as they are similar to the father from paternal seed. But those whom you see are of both appearances, mixing together the looks of their parents, grow from both the father's body and the mother's blood. When the seeds, aroused throughout the limbs by the goads of Venus, are brought into direct collision by mutual deep-breathing passion, and neither of the two of them conquers or is conquered in turn. It happens, too, that sometimes offspring can come into being, similar to their grandparents, and recall often features of great-grandparents. Because parents often conceal many first beginnings, mixed about in many ways in their own bodies, which, starting from the stock, fathers pass on to fathers. From this, Venus produces features by varied lot, and calls to mind the looks, voices, and hair of ancestors, since indeed these things occur by fixed seed, for us as much as our facial features, bodies, and limbs. And the female breed also arises from the father's seed, and males are born and come into being from the mother's seed. For an offspring is always the product of twofold seed, and to whichever of the two parents what is created resembles more, of that it has more than an equal share. This you can see whether the offspring is one of the male sex or a female birth. Nor do divine powers take away generative sowing from anyone, so that he might never be called father, by sweet children, and live his days in sterile love, as most people think, and, grieving, shower altars with much blood, and fire high altars with their gifts, in order that they make their wives pregnant with abundant seed. In vain do they fatigue the power of the gods and sacred lots. For some people are sterile because of excessively thick seed, and others because of seed which is runny and thin beyond what is right. The thin seed, since it cannot attach and adhere to places, runs off at once and withdraws backwards abortively. Further, since, for others, the seed is emitted too thick or too congealed, either it flies forward with insufficient thrust, or is unable to penetrate places as well, or having penetrated, the seed is mixed together poorly with the woman's seed. For the couplings of Venus are seen to vary greatly. For some men impregnate some women more easily, and some women take on weight by some men more easily, and grow pregnant. Many women have been sterile before in a series of marriages and later obtained a husband from whom they could conceive toddlers and grow rich in sweet offspring. And for men in whose house fertile wives often before could not bear, a compatible nature has been found for them too, so they could fortify their old age with children. Thus it is of very great importance that seeds be able to mingle with seeds in a way well suited for reproduction, and that thick seeds unite with runny and runny with thick. And it thus matters on what diet life is supported, for on some things the seeds grow thick in the limbs, and on others again they grow very thin and melt away. And in what ways the alluring pleasure itself is practiced, this too makes a great difference. For wives are thought for the most part to conceive better in the manner of beasts and similar to quadrupeds, for thus the proper places are able to receive the seeds, with the breasts lowered and the loins raised. Nor are soft movements necessary at all for wives, for a woman stops herself from conceiving and fights against it, if with her buttocks she gladly draws in the love of a man, and with her entire breast relaxed, produces undulating motions. For she thrusts the furrow away from the straight direction and the path of the plow, and turns the force of the seed away from her places. Prostitutes are accustomed to move in this way for themselves, so that they not be impregnated frequently and lie around expecting, and so the act of Venus itself be more refined and pleasurable for men. It seems that our wives have no need of this at all. Sometimes, neither by divine agency nor by the shafts of Venus, it happens that a woman of lesser worth and beauty is loved. For sometimes a woman herself, by her very own actions, and compliant ways and neatly groomed body, makes it so that she easily accustoms you to spend your life with her. What is more, close familiarity brings love into existence. For however lightly anything is struck by frequent blows, it is yet overcome in a long period of time and yields. Don't you also see that drops of liquid falling on rocks bore through the rocks in a long period of time?